Lisa Weiss steps forward with an explosive statement that shatters all the secrets of Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb. What have these two figures been hiding? And why could her words flip everything we thought we knew upside down? Get ready for the revelation of shocking truths that will change our perception of everything. This truth is too dangerous to ignore. Each word uncovers deeper, darker mysteries. Lisa Weiss has just dropped a bombshell that no one was expecting. Her shocking statement is shaking up everything we thought we knew about her ex-husband Doug Weiss and his quick remarriage to Joni Lamb. For years, the world saw Doug as a marriage expert, someone who helped couples fix their relationships. But Lisa's revelations show a side of him that no one could have imagined. Doug and Lisa's marriage seemed like a perfect example of what a Christian partnership should look like. They built a life together for over 30 years, raised children, and weathered the ups and downs that life threw at them. Doug was a trusted voice in marriage counseling, often sharing wisdom about commitment and love. Lisa, always by his side, appeared to be the supportive wife who helped him build that image. But behind the closed doors of their home, things were falling apart. Lisa wasn't just another woman quietly enduring the breakdown of her marriage. She felt ignored and invisible for years. Doug's focus shifted more and more to his career, his public image, and the ministry work that took him away from their home. Lisa found herself being left behind, emotionally disconnected from the very person she had once shared her life with. It wasn't about one huge argument. It was the slow, painful distance that built up over time. And for Lisa, it hurt more than any fight ever could. For Lisa, the moment Doug remarried Joni Lamb just months after their divorce was the ultimate shock. The speed of it all left her in disbelief. How could someone who preached about the sanctity of marriage move on so quickly? The world had watched them as a couple for so long, and now it seemed like Doug was throwing away everything they had built together without a second thought. Lisa's words exposed the raw pain she felt as she watched her husband start a new chapter so soon after the end of their marriage. But it's not just the timing that's troubling. Lisa's revelations about their relationship before the divorce suggest that things may not have been as straightforward as they seemed. Were Doug and Joni already emotionally involved before Lisa and Doug officially separated? How long had their connection been brewing under the surface? Lisa doesn't just talk about the hurt of losing a husband. She's uncovering a tangled web of secrets that challenge everything we thought we knew about Doug, Joni, and their marriage. Now with Lisa's statement, the truth is out there for everyone to hear. The facade of the perfect marriage is crumbling, and the messy, painful reality is coming to light. It's a revelation that no one could have predicted, and it's changing the way people view Doug and Joni's relationship, as well as their public image. Lisa's bravery in speaking out is opening doors to a story that's far from over. Divorce is one of the most difficult, painful experiences a person can go through. It's not just the legal separation or the end of a relationship. It's a deep emotional and spiritual struggle that can leave you feeling torn, confused, and often broken. The reality is, divorce is a no-win situation for everyone involved. Nobody really comes out of it unscathed. And that's part of why many people believe that God doesn't approve of divorce. It's messy, painful, and full of difficult choices. When you're in the middle of it, there's this deep internal conflict. You want to be a good person, to do right by everyone. You want to be liked, to be fair. But the truth is, when divorce enters your life, it's impossible to please everyone. You may find yourself torn between your spouse and someone else.
Joni Lamb called me. The biggest shock to me when Joni called me, she wasn't the Joni off television. She was fit to be tied. She was angry. She was even upset that I would say nice things about her son because she said, Jonathan is trying to kill me. And I said, he's trying to kill you. And she said, he's destroying the company. He's destroying us. He's destroying me. And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about, that Pete. The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home, that Pete is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign. I'd seen Jonathan in turmoil.
This is what Lisa Weiss found herself struggling with after years of marriage to Doug Weiss. The man she had once loved, the person she had built a life with, was suddenly slipping away. It wasn't a dramatic, sudden thing. It wasn't some big argument or betrayal that led to their marriage falling apart. Instead, it was the quiet, painful disconnection that crept in slowly over time. Doug, who had once been so present, so emotionally invested in their relationship, started to drift away. He became consumed with his work, his ministry, his speaking engagements, and his growing public persona as a marriage expert. As his career took off, Lisa felt herself fading into the background. The emotional distance between them grew, and no matter how much she tried to reach out, it felt like Doug was slipping further and further from her. At first, Lisa tried to convince herself that everything was okay. She kept telling herself that things would get better, that the distance was just temporary, that Doug would eventually come back to her. But as time passed, it became harder to ignore the reality that their marriage was falling apart. Doug wasn't just physically absent, he was emotionally unavailable too. He seemed more interested in his work than in the person who had stood by his side for decades, and that hurt more than any argument ever could. For Lisa, this wasn't just the breakdown of a marriage. It was the loss of her partner, the person she had once shared her life with. She wasn't just losing Doug, she was losing the dreams they had built together. They had talked about growing old together, about retirement, about their kids, and the future they had planned. And now, all of that was slipping through her fingers, and she had no control over it. Lisa didn't want to be angry or bitter. She didn't want to feel resentful, but she couldn't help it. She felt invisible, like she didn't matter anymore. Doug was out there helping other people save their marriages, giving speeches about love and commitment, all while Lisa was sitting at home, alone and unsure of what was happening to her own life. It was a strange, lonely feeling to see someone who had once been your everything become a stranger. There were times when Lisa thought about leaving. She thought about how much easier it would be to walk away from the pain and the heartbreak, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She loved Doug, or at least she loved the man she used to know. She wanted to believe that their marriage was worth fighting for, but it became clear that no matter how hard she tried, Doug wasn't going to fight for it. The emotional distance between them had become too wide to bridge. The hardest part of it all was the guilt. Divorce isn't something that anyone takes lightly, especially when you're a part of a community that views marriage as sacred. Lisa had spent years supporting Doug in his ministry, listening to him preach about the importance of commitment and faithfulness, and now, here she was, facing the possibility of the very thing he had warned so many others about. She couldn't help but wonder if she was failing, not just as a wife, but as a person of faith. Was God disappointed in her? Had she failed in her vows? These were the questions that kept her up at night, the thoughts that gnawed at her as she tried to make sense of everything. But it wasn't just the guilt that made things difficult, it was the fear of the unknown. What would life look like after Doug? How would she navigate the world without him by her side? They had built so much together, and now it felt like it was all falling apart. The idea of being alone was terrifying, and yet, she couldn't deny that it might be the only way forward. There was no easy way out of this situation. No matter what happened, there was going to be pain. As the divorce proceedings began, Lisa felt like she was living in a haze. It was a strange mix of numbness and overwhelming emotion. She wasn't angry at Doug. Not exactly, but there was a deep sadness that lingered, a sense of loss that she couldn't escape. It wasn't just about losing a husband. It was about losing the life she had imagined, the future she had planned. And it was hard to imagine a future without him, without the dreams they had once shared. When the divorce was finalized, it felt like the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of something new, a journey of healing, of figuring out who she was without Doug by her side. And yet, even with the divorce papers signed, the pain didn't go away. It wasn't something that could just be erased with a piece of paper. The emotional weight of everything she had been through stayed with her, and she found herself questioning everything: her worth, her faith, her purpose. But through all of this, Lisa held on to something: her faith. It was the one thing that remained constant when everything else seemed to be falling apart. She drew comfort from Scripture, from the promises of God, and from the belief that healing was possible. Even when life seemed to be in shambles, there were days when she didn't know how she was going to get through it. But she took it one step at a time, leaning on the support of her faith and the people who loved her. Lisa's journey was not easy, but it was hers. It was messy, painful, and full of self-discovery. It was about facing the hurt, confronting the brokenness, and learning to heal. She didn't have all the answers, but she had hope, and that was enough to carry her through the hardest moments. Divorce had torn apart the life she had known, but it also opened the door to a new chapter, one where she could find healing, growth, and eventually, peace. The road wasn't easy, and it still wasn't over. But Lisa knew that she had the strength to keep moving forward. In the end, it wasn't about forgetting Doug or erasing the past. It was about finding peace with the person she had become, and trusting that, no matter what, she was worthy of love and happiness. Divorce had taken so much from her, but it also gave her the opportunity to rebuild and rediscover who she was. It was a long, hard journey, but it was one she knew she had to take, and with time, Lisa would find herself stronger than she had ever been before. When Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb announced their remarriage, the world was left in shock. Doug had just gone through a public and painful divorce from his wife Lisa Weiss after being married for over 30 years. The speed with which he moved on to marry Joni, a woman who was not only a well-known figure in the Christian community but also his close colleague, raised more than a few eyebrows. The whole situation felt like a whirlwind, one that left many people confused, questioning what had really happened behind closed doors. Lisa, understandably, was blindsided. She had spent over 3 decades of her life building a life with Doug, raising children, and creating a future together. Now, just months after their separation, Doug was married to someone else. The speed of it all was almost too much to bear. Lisa had been dealing with the emotional fallout of a failing marriage for years. She had felt invisible, disconnected from Doug as his career took over their life. Now she was left to process the fact that he was starting a new chapter with someone else so soon. It felt like a slap in the face, and while Lisa tried her best to be strong, the pain was undeniable. For many people who had followed Doug and Lisa's story, the quick remarriage left them in disbelief. Doug had built his entire career on being a marriage expert, preaching about commitment, faith, and the sanctity of marriage. How could someone who had spent decades helping others save their marriages turn around and end his own so quickly? And what made it even more confusing was the fact that Doug had remarried Joni Lamb, a key figure in Christian media, just months after his divorce from Lisa. It felt like there was no time for reflection, for healing, or for processing the end of a 30-year marriage. To many, it looked as though Doug had moved on with ease, as if his entire relationship with Lisa hadn't meant anything. The timing of Doug's new relationship raised a lot of questions. How could someone who had preached for so long about the importance of patience, healing, and forgiveness jump into a new marriage so quickly? Was this new relationship with Joni something that had been brewing for a while, even before Doug and Lisa had officially separated? These were questions that many people started to ask, especially considering the fact that Doug and Joni had known each other for years. They had worked together within the same Christian circles, and while they had always been professional, the sudden shift from colleagues to romantic partners made some people uneasy. Lisa wasn't just hurt by the speed of Doug's remarriage, she was also confused. After all, she had been married to him for so long. She had been the one by his side through thick and thin, and now she was being replaced so quickly. She had to watch as Doug and Joni's relationship played out in the public eye, and it felt like a constant reminder of her own heartbreak. Doug was starting fresh with someone else, while Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had once envisioned. She felt like her entire world had been turned upside down, and the pain was intensified by the fact that everyone else seemed to be moving on while she was still struggling to understand what had gone wrong. While Lisa was processing her own emotions, the public was also grappling with the shock of Doug and Joni's remarriage. Some people were supportive, believing that Doug and Joni had found comfort in each other after going through their own personal losses. Joni's late husband marcuslamb had passed away, and many saw Doug's remarriage as a natural progression of finding someone who could understand the grief they both had experienced. In some ways, their relationship became a symbol of healing and hope. For others, however, it seemed to be the opposite, a symbol of hypocrisy and betrayal. How could someone who had spent his career helping others save their marriages end his own so quickly, and seemingly without remorse? The lack of transparency surrounding the timeline of Doug and Joni's relationship only fueled the speculation. Without a clear explanation from Doug and Joni about when their relationship had started, people were left to fill in the blanks. Had their professional relationship evolved into something more while Doug was still married to Lisa? Was this new marriage a result of a long-standing emotional connection that had been kept hidden? The silence from Doug and Joni only made matters worse, and the rumors about their relationship grew louder. People wanted answers, but they were left with nothing but questions and doubts. For Lisa, the rapid remarriage felt like a betrayal not just from Doug, but from the entire public. She had spent so much time supporting him, standing by his side as he built his career and public image, and now she was left to face the reality that the life she had worked so hard to build was gone. It wasn't just about losing a husband. It was about losing the life she had known for so long. She had invested so much of herself into their marriage, and now, with no warning, Doug was moving on, starting a new life with someone else. The speed of it all felt like a slap in the face, and Lisa couldn't help but feel like she was the one who had been left behind. The emotional toll of Doug's remarriage wasn't just about Lisa's feelings of betrayal. It also raised ethical questions about Doug's role as a marriage counselor and expert. Doug had spent decades preaching about the importance of commitment, loyalty, and forgiveness in marriage. He had built his entire career around these principles, and now, with his quick remarriage, it seemed like those principles didn't apply to his own life. People began to question whether Doug's personal actions contradicted the very advice he had given to so many couples. Was he living the values he preached? Or was his public image just that, a carefully constructed facade that hid the truth of his personal life? As time went on, the public's perception of Doug and Joni's relationship continued to evolve. Some people still supported them, seeing their remarriage as a natural outcome of shared grief and healing. Others, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The quickness of the remarriage, the lack of transparency, and the questions about Doug's previous marriage all contributed to a growing sense of discomfort. People wanted answers, but all they got were vague statements and silence. This only made the situation more complicated, leaving people to wonder if there was more to the story than they were being told. In the end, Doug and Joni's rapid remarriage left a lasting impact on the public's perception of them. For some, it was a reminder of the messy, complicated nature of relationships, while for others, it was a stark reminder of the hypocrisy that can exist behind the polished image of public figures. Doug's quick transition from one marriage to another left people questioning his integrity and his commitment to the values he had spent so long preaching. The aftermath of this rapid remarriage was more than just a personal matter. It became a public spectacle that raised uncomfortable questions about marriage, loyalty, and the public personas of those who claimed to be experts in these areas. The public reaction to Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb's rapid remarriage was nothing short of a media storm. What many people saw as a simple remarriage turned into a public spectacle, and the fallout was felt far and wide. It wasn't just about Doug and Joni's personal lives anymore. It became a story about the power of public perception, about faith, about expectations, and about how quickly a public figure's carefully crafted image can unravel in the face of scandal and surprise. Doug Weiss, for many years, had been a trusted figure in the Christian community. He was known as a marriage expert, someone who had spent decades counseling couples, writing books on commitment, and speaking at seminars about the sanctity of marriage. To many, Doug was the embodiment of faith, commitment, and strong relationships. His teachings were grounded in his own life experiences, which made him a credible and relatable voice in the world of marriage counseling. Doug's public persona was built on these ideals, and he was a beacon of hope for many couples struggling with their own relationships. But all of that changed the moment Doug remarried Joni Lamb, just months after his divorce from Lisa Weiss. For many, this was a shock. How could someone who had spent his entire career preaching about commitment, loyalty, and love move on so quickly? It felt as though the values he had spent decades espousing were being thrown out the window. Doug, the marriage expert, was now married to someone else, and the timing of it left many people scratching their heads. For those who had followed Doug and Lisa's story, the rapid remarriage seemed to come out of nowhere. Doug's divorce had only been finalized months earlier, and yet here he was, married to Joni Lamb, a woman who had been his close colleague for years. The speed of the remarriage raised eyebrows. To some, it seemed like a betrayal of everything Doug had taught. How could someone who had been such a vocal advocate for marriage preservation move on so quickly? What made the situation even more complicated was the fact that Doug's new wife, Joni Lamb, was not just any woman. She was a prominent figure in Christian media. She was the co-founder of Day Television Network, a well-known platform that had been built on strong Christian values. Joni's marriage to Doug raised further questions about the intersection of personal and professional lives. Was their relationship the result of a shared grief over their respective losses, or was it something that had been brewing long before Doug's marriage to Lisa ended? The lack of clarity surrounding the timeline of their relationship only added fuel to the fire. People began to speculate. Had Doug and Joni been involved while Doug was still married to Lisa? Was their professional relationship more than just that? Had it crossed into personal territory while Doug was still committed to Lisa? Without a clear answer, the rumors grew louder. People wanted to know when Doug's relationship with Joni had really started. Was their marriage a natural progression, or was there something more under the surface that had been kept hidden from the public eye? For Lisa, the pain of seeing Doug move on so quickly was compounded by the public scrutiny. It wasn't just about losing her husband. It was about having to watch as her personal heartbreak played out in front of the world. Divorce is difficult enough without the added pressure of being in the public eye, and Lisa found herself not only dealing with the loss of a marriage, but also facing the judgment of a community that once looked up to Doug as a role model. Every detail of their split, every moment of their divorce, was dissected by the media and their followers. Lisa was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, her personal pain turned into a public spectacle. The emotional toll of it all was overwhelming. And yet, even though Lisa's own heartbreak was raw and real, it was Doug's remarriage that seemed to capture the public's attention the most. The speed with which Doug moved on from his 30-year marriage to Lisa raised questions about his character and the authenticity of his public persona. The fact that Doug had remarried Joni Lamb so quickly felt like a direct contradiction to the advice he had given to so many couples over the years. His message had always been about the importance of commitment and the sanctity of marriage. Yet here he was, moving on less than a year after the end of his marriage. This hypocrisy was hard for many people to swallow,